I would say of Sturgeon that he's, and I can't find anything embracing, but you know his work, it's distinctive. And in a line I've used too many times, an absolutely individual voice is of itself no guarantee of greatness, but without it, greatness is impossible. You always know a Sturgeon story. You always know Ravel. You don't know von Dittersdorf, you know Hyman. You could tell the difference, if you have any sophistication, between a Haydn minuet and a Mozart minuet. Sturgeon has his own sound. And I would be hard-pressed on this panel to then really debase that statement by trying to specify it. But Sturgeon stories are distinct and individual. The terrible ones are as distinct as the very good ones. You know, and Lord knows we've all read enough bad Sturgeon, but it's Sturgeon. It is clearly the one about the sexually incapacitated cowboy. What the Scar? The Scar is a terrible story. It's an embarrassment, but it's Sturgeon. It is distinctly Sturgeon as Baby is 3. Yeah. So that I get at that from the back end.
Although Larry McCaffrey said in one of his introductions that Sturgeon's Law, which he wrote because he was angry that science fiction was so looked down upon, and he said, 90% of everything is crap, depending on whether he was in polite company. And then Larry McCaffrey said, but that Sturgeon Law actually doesn't apply to Sturgeon.
Something that's been said many, many times, but it contains its truth. A good deal, the overriding theme that you see come again and again through a Sturgeon is varieties of love, and how people relate to one another and can relate to one another. Even the exploration of the self. What part of the self has to be healthy in order to love? Mm-hmm. It's not just about the self. It's what part of the self has to be healthy in order to relate to someone else, and what part can be damaged. What part can be damaged. What part has to have some strength to it, and that's pretty amazing. There's also I was saying when I was doing my reading yesterday that Sturgeon is a very American writer, to the point where I think you could give the 100 best stories of Sturgeon and make up, you want to cut out a few. Not as many as you would think, though. I mean, the percentage of really good stuff is amazing. And even to quote Judith Merrill, even the most unevenly composed Sturgeon story, and there are some unevenly composed, has something that's uniquely Sturgeon about it. A story that I remember reading as a young person and being very moved by, and so I picked it up just before I came here to Readercon, and My Fear is Great. And this is a story that was really incredibly moving to me when I first read it. And so I started it again, and the first 25 or 20, it's a long story, it's one of his longest stories, and the first 25 or 30 pages are astonishing. And then it falls rather spectacularly apart because it gets too ambitious. He wants to do stuff that the beginning of the story just isn't set out to do. Nevertheless, as clumsy as it is, by the end I was just weeping buckets. As clumsy as the story was, it was extraordinarily emotional, and I kept thinking, I'm going to try and rewrite this story someday. Because it's got the material for a great story in it. And he was probably rushed, and I'm sure the bill collectors were barking at the back door. So he had to finish it up. But it's a story where he really wants. You can tell, however clumsy the narrative, the narrative is. It's something that the basic plot and the basic idea obviously means a lot to him. And he thinks he wants to finish the story, and he wants that story out there, clearly. And so that was kind of fascinating to look at the story. And as I said, the first 25 pages is, you couldn't have a better Sturgeon story.
Well, picking up on your remark of your desire to rewrite a certain story that you like, let's talk a little bit about the influence of Sturgeon, which is what the panel was advertised to discuss as well. And not just the stories, and we were emphasizing the stories because of the complete stories, because he was mostly a short story writer, but the novels as well. What do you think the influence of Sturgeon is, in, not just on the SF field, but on the broader culture, on the counterculture, on other artists and so forth?
Too broad a question.
Sorry, you can narrow it. You're welcome to narrow it.
I'm an old hippie. I can tell you actually briefly flirted with the counterculture, and I found that when I lived in a commune for 3 months, everybody in that commune had read Sturgeon. I found it amazing. But that's just a personal thing, But yeah, I think he really did. I think there was a lot more going on, especially since he was, in the 40s and 50s, they didn't discuss sexual taboos, and Chip already discussed that, basically, that he did a lot of things that nobody else did at the time, and about finding yourself and in order to love. I think that was very influential to a lot of us. Yeah.
Also, Sturgeon knew how to write, and I don't think when you read some of Chekhov's letters on how to write, Chekhov and Sturgeon knew some of the same things. There's a famous Chekhov passage about if you want to describe an old mill in the moonlight, you can sit there and describe it, but all you have to do to really make it work is talk about how the moonlight hits one piece of broken glass lying on the wet stones, and you've got the whole thing. And Sturgeon knew the same thing. Sturgeon said in a letter to Judith Merrill in the 50s that she quoted in the article that she wrote in the special Sturgeon issue of F&SF. Sturgeon said that people was already always asking him, how do you write such incredibly vivid scenes? And this is the thing that I think, certainly is what struck me as a young writer is, everybody else told stories. Sturgeon, I start reading a Sturgeon story and suddenly I am somewhere else, or I am, or I'm, and the places were not exceptionally fantastic places. They were cabins in Woodstock, and which you were pretty sure was probably the one he was living in when he wrote the story. But he could, he could give you the bellied out screening on the window, or this, that, and the other. And he described how he did it. And he said, well, basically what you do is you spend a lot of time visualizing the place where the story takes place. Everything, from the trowel marks and the plaster on the ceiling to the to the price sticker on the that's still left on the window pane in the corner, and you visualize it all. And then he said, you don't describe it. He said, what you do is you move your character in a certain emotional state through that scene, and you mention only those things that impinge on the character's consciousness. But because you've done the imaginative work, you have all that stuff available to you. And if you do that, and then he makes another brilliant statement that could come straight out of a Chekhov letter. The scene that the reader imagines will not be the same as the scene that you imagined. But it will be just as intense, just as powerful, and just as emotionally strong to the reader as the scene was to you. And that's the secret. In a way, he's saying that, you're not really communicating something from you. You're making the reader have an experience that only the reader can have, what the reader feels like it's being communicated by you. And it's really quite wonderful. And I've been telling my students this, ever since from the first class I ever taught, to the last workshop down at Temple University. And I read them the paragraph and say, now you guys go do